In the old kingdom of Amanquina, there were many customs and traditions that governed life and death. The people of Amanquina were known for their deep connection to the spirits of the land, and it was said that the spirits of their ancestors watched over them from the unseen world. The line between the living and the dead was thin, and the people knew that to disturb the balance of the spiritual world was to invite disaster upon themselves. Amanquina was ruled by a king, Is-Abenwan, a man of great power and wisdom. He was respected by his people, but his rule was harsh. He was not known for his kindness, but for his swift judgment and unyielding authority. The laws were strict, and any who defied the king were punished severely. In Amanquina, crimes were met with brutal consequences, and the most feared punishment of all was Ijala, the journey into the earth, being buried alive. Ijala was reserved for the most heinous crimes: murder, treason, and blasphemy against the ancestors. It was believed that those buried alive would be sent directly to the underworld, denied the peace of the afterlife. Their souls would wander endlessly in darkness, never to find rest. The people of Amanquina feared this punishment above all else, and for centuries, it was rarely invoked. But then came the time of Nadi, a young man whose name would become forever intertwined with the darkest tale the village had ever known. Nadi was a quiet, hard-working farmer, respected by his neighbors for his diligence and kindness. He lived a simple life, tending to his fields and taking care of his aging mother. Despite his humble means, Nadi was content with his life, until the day his world was shattered by a terrible accusation. It all began one fateful evening when the chief priest of the village, Enzarins, was found dead in the forest near the sacred shrine of the ancestors. Enzarins was a revered man, believed to be the mouthpiece of the gods, and his sudden and violent death sent shockwaves through the kingdom. His body was discovered with deep, jagged wounds that no one could explain, and the people whispered of dark magic, of someone who had angered the spirits. In their grief and fear, the elders convened and demanded justice. The king declared that whoever had murdered Enzarins must be found and punished without mercy, for such a crime could not go unanswered. It wasn't long before fingers began to point and rumors spread like wildfire. Nadi's name came up, first in hushed whispers and then in open accusation. It was said that he had been seen near the forest on the night of the murder, that he had been acting strangely in the days leading up to it. Some claimed that Nadi had always been jealous of the chief priest, envious of his power and favor with the king. Nadi was taken from his home in the dead of night, dragged before the elders and the king. His protests fell on deaf ears, and despite his pleas of innocence, the people were desperate for someone to blame. The fear of the spirits, the anger over Enzarins' death, clouded their judgment. A swift trial was held, and Nadi was found guilty of the murder. The king pronounced his sentence with grim finality. Nadi would face Ijala. He would be buried alive. The day of the execution was a somber one. The village gathered at the outskirts of the forest, where a shallow grave had been dug beneath a large, ancient tree. The tree was sacred, its roots believed to reach into the underworld, where the ancestors dwelled. It was beneath this tree that Nadi's body would be returned to the earth, denied the peace of a proper burial. Nadi stood at the edge of the grave, his wrists bound with thick rope, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never felt fear like this before, a fear so deep that it threatened to consume him. He could hear the chants of the villagers behind him, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm that made the earth beneath his feet tremble. As he was forced to kneel at the edge of the grave, Nadi looked up at the sky one last time, the bright sun blinding him. He wondered if the gods were watching, if the spirits of the ancestors knew the truth, that he was innocent. But no one spoke on his behalf. No divine intervention came to save him. The elders began to speak, invoking the names of the ancestors, calling for their judgment and forgiveness. Nadi's mind raced as the chief elder poured libations on the earth, asking the spirits to accept his body as an offering. He was lowered into the shallow grave, his hands still bound, and the earth was piled on top of him. As the soil covered his body, Nadi felt a suffocating weight press down on his chest. His lungs burned as he struggled to breathe, the cold earth pressing against his skin. Darkness closed in around him, and the last sound he heard was the muffled chants of the villagers fading into silence. But Nady did not die. The village returned to their daily lives, believing that justice had been served and the spirits appeased. Weeks passed, and the story of Nady's execution began to fade into memory. But something strange began to happen in the village. At first, it was just whispers. People claimed to hear strange noises at night, voices carried on the wind. The elders dismissed it as paranoia, the lingering effects of grief. But soon, the strange occurrences became impossible to ignore. People reported seeing shadows moving at the edge of the forest, figures that disappeared when approached. Children spoke of hearing a man's voice calling out from beneath the ground, pleading for help. Some even claimed that they had seen Nady's face in their dreams, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth full of dirt. One night, during a heavy storm, a group of hunters ventured into the forest to seek shelter. As they passed near the ancient tree where Nady had been buried, they heard something that made their blood run cold. A voice, faint but unmistakable, calling out from beneath the earth, "Help me, I am not dead." The hunters, terrified, ran back to the village and reported what they had heard. The news spread like wildfire, and soon the entire village was in an uproar. Some believed that Nady's spirit had returned to haunt them, seeking revenge for the injustice done to him. Others feared that the gods had cursed them for burying an innocent man. The king, troubled by the reports, summoned the elders to consult on the matter. After much debate, it was decided that they would return to the grave and see for themselves if there was truth to the rumors. A small group of elders, accompanied by the king and a few brave villagers, made their way to the ancient tree. The air was thick with tension as they reached the burial site. The ground was wet from the rain, and the tree's gnarled roots twisted like claws above the soil. With trembling hands, the elders began to dig, their shovels biting into the earth. It wasn't long before they uncovered something that made their hearts stop. Nady's body, still intact, his face twisted in a grimace of horror, his mouth open as if frozen in a silent scream. His hands, which had been bound at the time of his burial, were now clawing at the earth around him, as though he had tried to dig his way out. But the most terrifying thing was his eyes. They were open. Panic swept through the village. The elders, shaken by what they had seen, declared that the spirits had been angered and that Nady's soul had not found rest. The king, fearing for his people, ordered a purification ritual to be performed, hoping to appease the gods and bring peace to the village. But the rituals did nothing to stop the strange occurrences. The haunting only grew worse. People began to fall ill, struck by strange fevers and nightmares. Some disappeared without a trace, and those who ventured near the forest claimed to see Nady's figure walking among the trees, his eyes glowing in the darkness. It was said that Nady's spirit had become one with the earth, bound to the soil in which he had been unjustly buried. He wandered beneath the ground, forever seeking vengeance on those who had wronged him. The village of Amanquina, once peaceful and prosperous, became a place of fear and sorrow, cursed by the soul of the man they had condemned to be buried alive. In the years that followed, the village fell into ruin. The people scattered, abandoning their homes in search of safety from the restless spirit that haunted the land. The ancient tree, once a symbol of the ancestors, stood as a reminder of the dark past, its roots entwined with the bones of the man who had been buried beneath it. And so, the story of Nady became a warning passed down through generations, a tale of pride, injustice, and the terrifying consequences of being buried before your time. But some say, on quiet nights, when the wind is still, you can still hear his voice whispering from beneath the earth, calling out for justice. "Help me, I am not dead."